What's up, guys? Welcome to the Two-Wheeled Rider YouTube channel. My name is Mario Orsini, and today I am back with another motorcycle review. So today I have the brand new 2018 Ducati 821 in Ducati yellow, courtesy of the good folks up at Ducati Winchester. Be sure to check them out. I'm going to put their information up here on the screen and also link it down in the description below. So as I do with all of my motorcycle review videos, we're going to start out with some of the main specs on the bike. Then I'm going to show you some of the features and how some of that stuff works on it. Then I'm going to take it out and ride it and give you some of my thoughts on how it performs, what I like about the bike, what I don't like about the bike, and then we'll come back here and wrap up. So, as its name suggests, the Monster 821 is an 821cc water-cooled, fuel-injected L-twin 4-valve per cylinder engine. This claimed 109 horsepower, 63 foot-pound torque engine is equipped with a slipper clutch, 6-speed transmission going back to a final chain drive. Moving up to the front of the bike, we have a 43mm upside-down front fork with a little over 5 inches of travel. On the back of the bike, we have a monoshock from Sachs, which is adjustable, and it has right around 5.5 inches of travel. Moving back to the front of the bike, we have twin 320mm disc with 4 piston calipers. The back of the bike is equipped with a single 245mm disc with a twin piston caliper. Both front and rear have ABS from Bosch. One more quick thing about the brakes, you do have stainless steel brake lines front and rear. Wheels on the bike are 17 inches. The front tire is a 120 with the rear tire being a 180. And stock from the factory, they're coming with Pirelli Diablo Rossa 3 tires. This steel trellis frame bike comes in at 430 pounds wet with all fluids and the battery in it. Speaking of fluids, you do have a 4.36 gallon fuel tank. And when it comes to seat height, depending on which setup you're using, it's somewhere just a little under 31 inches or nearly 32-inch seat height. And last but not least on this bike, if you're wondering about maintenance intervals, you're looking at oil changes and minor service at the 9,000 mile mark, and you're looking at valve checks / valve adjustments at the 18,000 mile mark. So now that I've given you some of the main specs on the bike, next we're going to move on to some of the features. I'm going to show you how those work, and then we'll go out to the road test portion of this review video. All right, so let's start here in the cockpit area. We're going to go ahead and turn on the key. This is not a fob actuated bike like a lot of new bikes are coming these days. You still are key operation. Here you can see we've got a nice little TFT display. You have a decent sized gear indicator right here. You can also tell where your ABS and traction control are currently set. You've got your engine coolant temperature. You also do have a fuel gauge on this bike that you can see right there. You can see we currently have it in sport mode. As you change the different ride modes on the bike, your display is going to look slightly different. All right, so if we come over here, we hit this button, you can see it brings up this screen right here. If we use this little indicator switch here, we can now toggle through the different settings we want to be in. So sport mode is going to be your most responsive. That's where you're going to get your highest performance, least amount of ABS, and least amount of traction control kicking in. Urban's going to give you the most traction control and the most ABS kicking in, and then touring mode is going to kind of split the difference a little bit. If you want to switch, you do have to be off the throttle, but you just hold in on the button and it'll switch you over. Of course, I'm already in sport mode. You'll see it flash a few times. Once it stops flashing, you know it's switched over. Now go ahead and take a look at your tachometer on there right now. I'll show you how it works in a moment. But as you can tell, when I switch it over to, say, urban mode, watch what the tach does now. But I actually don't even have a tach when it's in urban mode. Now, speaking of these menus, I showed you what was available in sport mode. You can see here in touring mode, I can see my total trip time, I can see my total miles, I can see trip 1, trip 2, and then the range left on this fuel tank. Now, to do all that, you're just hitting up on this switch here. If you hit down on the same switch, that's where it's going to change the information on the right-hand side of the screen for average speed, outside air temperature, consumption average, and the other one's like real-time consumption average. So anyway, on this small screen, you actually do have a decent bit of information. You also have your clock up here in the upper left-hand corner, and you can see some of these lights flashing. You do have some idiot lights built in. You can also see you got your turn signal indicators, and I believe it lights up there. It lights up green when you put it into neutral, in addition to having the gear's position indicator there as well. Moving over here, this is your high beam, low beam. You also do have the passing light built in right there. This is what you're using to control your menu. Down here, this is your turn signal, but when you hold in on it, that's how you bring up the screen for the menu and to also toggle through, and I'll show you some of the menu stuff, but also to toggle through to change the fuel mapping on it. You also have your horn button. We move over here to the right-hand side. This is a little bit different type of setup. When it's kicked up here, that means the kill switch is on. When it's here, it's just in a neutral position. And then when you pull this down, it obviously starts the motorcycle. So I was talking about the tach a minute ago. You can see how the tach works on it. Little LED display, little bar display. Also over here on this side, you have your hazard lights. All right, so if you look over here on the left-hand side, you can see you have a cable actuated clutch. You do have hydraulic brakes, and that is front and rear. If we go back into this menu, you can see that you do have a bunch of different things you can set. You can set your riding mode. You can I'm guessing you can fine tune your display. So if I wanted, okay, so that's info mode, backlight. So you can probably fine tune it a little bit more than what we had earlier. Let's see. We can do lap time stuff on it. Unit setting, you know, if you wanted to put it in metric mode, date and clock, set that kind of stuff. Reset your service light, general information, and then tire information, tire setting. I'm assuming, and I don't know for a fact, I'd have to look it up in the manual. I'm assuming that so maybe you could set it for different profile tires to make sure your speedometer stays in check and where it's supposed to be. Anyway, and then you also have Bluetooth there to hook up a helmet or your Bluetooth headset. A couple other things on this bike. When you take a look at the rear, it looks like there's no spot for a passenger. There actually is. This is just the, I don't know if this is optional or it comes standard. This is just a seat cowling to give it a little bit cooler look to the bike. If we pop the seat off, all we have to do is put the key in right there and twist it. Seat pops right off. We'll take a look at the toolkit here. I'm going to guess that this toolkit is much like the one on the Hyper Motor that I just rode the other day. It's in the same bag. It's probably about the same stuff, but we'll take a look. Once again, just like the Hyper Motor I recently reviewed, pretty Spartan toolkit. Looks almost the exact same setup. You got some helmet locks right here. You've got a socket. You've got a little torsion bar there for the socket to help you spin it. We've got a screwdriver handle with a Phillips and a flat bit that we can insert in there. We've got a couple of Allen keys, and once again, a fuse pivot.
Hey guys, it's Angela. I'm back. As you know, I'm a Ducati Monster owner, and this past weekend I went up to Duck Pond and was able to take this Ducati Monster 821 out for a spin. A few of the things I really liked about this bike is this yellow seat cowling back here. I'm usually a solo rider. I thought it really made the bike pop. I also liked the 821 logo that they have on here. I thought the decals looked really cool. They're kind of all over the place, especially right up here on the gas tank. Is really cool looking. There's also some other Monster logos on here that I caught just a little while ago, and one is actually inside the LED headlight. I thought was pretty cool. One of the other things I really liked on this bike is the TFT display. It kind of caught me by surprise. It was a little bit more high-tech than I was expecting for a sport bike, and I really like the fuel gauge display on it, something I'm not really used to. I really liked the way this bike rode. The riding position for me was very comfortable. I liked how when I accelerated, my legs just slid right around the tank, nice and snug. The response I got from the throttle in the sport mode on the back roads, I really liked. A little herky-jerky, but I actually really liked it. It was good response, good reaction from the bike. I got the power that I wanted. The rear tire felt really good going into turns. I felt very comfortable and could actually push my limit a little bit more. There were a few things about this bike that I didn't like. One was, after about 15 or 20 minutes of riding, my legs definitely started to heat up from the engine. And the other thing is, I just don't like the look at the radiator of the liquid-cooled engine. The air-cooled engine is just a much cleaner look. That aside, I really looked forward to getting on this bike each time and riding. It's great to rip into the back roads in the sport mode, but it's also nice to be able to kick it in the touring mode and take it down the road for a weekend trip.
So the 2018 Ducati Monster 821. Let me just start by saying I'm an unapologetic Monster fan. I've loved these bikes since they first came out. Now in its 25th year in 2018. While the styling's changed a little bit, there's no mistaking it's a Monster. Another thing that's changed over the years is they have gotten more refined as the years have gone on. But fortunately for Monster fans, they're not too refined, just a little bit better. So I've got to ride this bike for a few days now. It's actually the second time I've had it out. I had it out a few weeks ago when Triumph Rider was in town. We went out for a couple of test rides. I took this and he took the Panigale. But I've got to ride it around a little bit more today. I've had it out on the interstate. I've taken this thing through town. but as you can see, I'm out on the fun back roads because that's where this thing is most at home. So let me give you some thoughts on it. First off, a 110 horsepower motorcycle, 20 years ago would not be near this easy to ride. But and I'm not saying it's tame, it's not. What I'm saying is it's not difficult to ride. So even if your riding level is not very high, despite the fact that it's a pretty high horsepower machine, it's still pretty easy to ride this thing. And part of that comes into the fact that, yeah, when you get up in the RPM range, there is gobs of horsepower. But down low, you can be a little lazy with it and not shift so much because there's plenty of torque down low to keep you moving. So if you want to set up for this turn just like I did and just keep it in 5th gear, you can do that. There's no need to downshift and get on the brakes hard or anything. It's got plenty of engine braking. If you want to be a little lazy and you just want to coast while you're riding, which I know I shouldn't do, you can get away with that. The brakes on this bike are far better than what used to come on these machines. The ABS I haven't found to be very intrusive. But man, do the brakes really slow this thing down. It's got pretty close to the same braking setup as that Hyper Motor I had out last week. But the difference is this bike is 20 pounds lighter. So the brakes do an excellent job of slowing it down, bringing it to a complete stop. And fortunately, like I said, at least in sport mode, you're not going to have that ABS kick in too often. Now when it comes to handling on the bike, I'm a little split. First off, we kept production costs down by not allowing the fork to be adjustable. The rear shock is adjustable, but I haven't adjusted it yet. And to be honest, I probably should, because that is my only complaint on the bike, when it comes to handling, is the suspension. I don't want to call it on the rough side. We'll call it on the sporty side of things. You hit some, I hit some seams out on the interstate, and I really felt them on my butt when that thing would rebound back. So it probably could be straightened out with just some adjustments, but in stock form, the way I picked the bike up where it's at, I would like it to be just a little bit softer. I have nothing but good things to say about the tires. These Pirelli tires, I think the Hyper had the Rosso 2s on it. This one had the Rosso 3s. It's just a minor change, nothing major. But these are good gripping tires. I have no idea what how long they'll last. I did, it rained here pretty hard earlier today, so when I first went out riding, the roads were pretty wet. I'll talk about traction control here in a minute, but let's just say I had full confidence in the tires, even if the traction control system didn't a couple of times. So really like these stock tires. Let's talk about ergos for a moment. For the most part, you've got a pretty comfortable riding position on this bike, but as with most monsters, I always feel like I'm just a tad bit cramped from, I don't really want to say my waist down, because I actually do like the saddle on this thing. I find it to be pretty comfortable, and I think it would be pretty suitable for all day riding. But basically, like, my hip flexors and my knees and my ankles feel a little cramped. The rear sets are a little high, a little further back than what I'd like them to be. That said, from my waist up, I feel pretty good. I've got a nice reach to the handlebars. I am leaned forward a little bit, which doesn't really put much stress on your lower back, because you do have the wind hitting you. Since you have no wind protection, it hits you right in the chest where you want it to, and helps hold you upright. So overall, the riding position's not bad. It's not quite sport bike, it's not quite normal standard bike, it's somewhere in between. Speaking of wind hitting you, one of my complaints about the Hyper Motor taking it down the interstate was I just didn't like it out on the interstate. The Monster's a little bit better because the forward-leaning position, you don't get beat up quite as bad. You are able to tuck down a little bit more on it for some of the wind to miss you. A little bit more comfortable out on the interstate. Still not great. They used to offer these things with bikini fairings. I don't know if you can still get them. I would imagine you could. They help a little bit. They're not going to turn it into an all-out touring bike, but it will help a little bit with the wind. So I'm starting to get used to these TFT displays. They're coming standard on more and more bikes. There's a couple little nuances I don't like about this one. Maybe it can be tuned a little more. I'll look through the owner's manual on it. But the information it provides is easy to read quickly. And that's the biggest thing about gauges or displays. They're supposed to provide you with information, and if you can't see it quickly, it's dangerous. And this thing, you can see it quickly. With a quick glance, I can see what speed I'm going. See, I told you guys it was raining earlier. That's nasty. I can see what speed I'm going. I can see what gear I'm in pretty easily. The tachometer on it for an LCD is not too tough to read. It's nice that they included a fuel gauge. I really don't have any major complaints about the display setup. The other thing, what I was nitpicking on some of on the Hyper Motor and also the Scrambler models, I didn't like the setup over here because I kept bumping the horn button. This one I don't have to worry about it. The Monster's got a different set of controls over here, and I don't have any issue bumping the horn button or getting to any of the rest of my controls. So I talked about the engine a few minutes ago. Let me talk about the transmission. Transmission is very smooth shifting. Doesn't require a whole lot of effort on the lever. I usually clutchless upshift, like I just did right there. This is not one that you can clutchless upshift and downshift. If you know what you're doing, you can clutchless upshift. It's really easy. Haven't missed any gears on it. The slipper clutch on it works extremely well in aiding you in not locking up the rear wheel if you were to downshift too quickly. Keep in mind, it is a cable actuated clutch. It's just as easy a 2-finger pull as what the Hyper was last week. So even though it's a Monster, even though it's a high horsepower bike, if you're new to motorcycles and you don't have real big hands or whatever the case may be, you're not going to have any issues pulling in the clutch on this bike. Let me just touch on the mirrors for a second. I believe these are the same exact mirrors as the 797 my sister and I took out and rode and reviewed last year. They're okay. I mean, they're nothing to write home about. They're mirrors. You can see behind you. You're going to have your elbows in them. I especially have my right elbow in it a little bit more than my left for some reason, but they're okay. So let me talk about a couple things I don't like about the bike. One of the first things I noticed in not riding it very far is the amount of engine heat I'm getting around my legs. I'm sure some of that is coming off the exhaust. If I'm actually just wearing regular old blue jeans today, typically I wear riding pants, so I probably wouldn't notice it as much. But even though it's a liquid-cooled bike, there's a decent amount of heat coming off this engine and exhaust system. You know, I mentioned earlier, these Monsters are more refined than they used to be, but they're still not totally refined, you know, because that's part of its character. So from closed throttle to maybe 20%, if you're really smooth on the inputs, the fuel injection will be really smooth. You won't have any problems. You're not going to have any problems if you're not easy on it. But if you're not easy from closed to about 20%, you just kind of open it up, you are going to feel a little bit of abruptness, a little bit of jerkiness in it until it smooths back out. It's not really a knock on it because, like I said, that's part of the Monster's character, but it's just something to be aware of if you've never ridden one of these things before. But there is one thing I don't like about this Monster, and it's not really its fault because it's actually one of its strengths in the fact that it's liquid cooled. It's just not as pretty as the air-cooled model. While this engine and radiator and hoses and everything are black, so Ducati did a pretty good job of hiding everything out in the open, there's just no getting around this giant radiator up front, these big coolant hoses running over here on the side. I just like the air-cooled look so much better. Yeah, sure, they don't make quite as much power. They're not as refined. Call me old school if you want. There's just something about an old 2-valve air-cooled engine that I like. So again, your mileage may vary. It may not bother you at all. You may say, hey, I like the new technology. Great. I just like the look of the air-cooled bike so much better. Speaking of looks, so when you think Ducati, you think red, but this Ducati yellow is one hell of a good-looking color. And, you know, I thought it was just me because I'm a motorcycle guy. I looked at it, I was like, I think that looks cool. However, on 2 separate occasions, we've had this bike out with the new Panigale V4S. The first time I was on the V4S, and John Morris was out with me on this bike. And then the second time I was out on this bike, and Triumph Rider was out on the V4S, and we were sitting at stoplights in town, and I swear, the Monster got just as many looks as the Panigale got. And I think that's something where, like I was saying earlier, you know, people know what a Monster is. This bike's been out for 25 years. The styling has stayed pretty much the same. When you add that to this bright yellow color, it's just, I don't know, I think it looks cool. You may not like it, and that's cool because they make it in other colors too. So I want to mention one more thing. I was talking about how this bike's easy to ride. Well, this model is out as well as the 797 or the 797 Plus, whatever you want to call it. And I'm trying to decide which one would be better for the, you know, newer rider. Now, the 797 doesn't make near the power this thing has, but when you put this thing in urban mode, it really neuters the bike. It makes it so much more docile. So I'm almost wondering if a beginner rider wouldn't mind having it in urban mode for a while until they got used to it, then maybe move up to tour mode, and then, you know, have the all-out experience in sport mode, so it would give them a bike to grow into instead of buying, you know, the lesser powered bike and then a couple of years down the road wanting the more powerful bike. You could almost grow into this bike. The traction control in urban mode is definitely turned up. I had it kick on 2 or 3 times while I was riding it. In tour mode, the traction control kicked in twice, I think, while I was riding it. I spun up the rear tire on it there and it started to kick in. On sport mode, I've only had it kick on once, and that's when I hit a set of railroad tracks pretty fast, and you know, the tires weren't on the ground, so the computer got a little upset. But it's just some thoughts. I really like the 797. Do I like it more than the 821? I mean, the 821 will outperform it, but there's just something about that red trellis frame and that air-cooled engine I like about the 797. If you haven't seen that video I did on it, if I haven't linked it already, I'll link it up in the corner, or I'll link it down in the description below. Check it out. I think they're both great bikes. You know, it's tough for me to pick one over the other. So if I had to wrap up my thoughts on this Monster in one word, it would be familiar. It's just a familiar bike. And not just because it's a Monster and I've ridden, you know, I've been riding these things for, what, 16 years or something now. It's because it's just it's a motorcycle. It's nothing special about it. It's not a great touring bike. It's not an outstanding sport bike. It's just a regular old motorcycle that does everything pretty good. It's the way motorcycles used to be made. They were meant, you bought one and you modified it the way you wanted it. So when you get on this thing, the seating position's familiar, the throttle control's familiar, the brakes are familiar, the handling's good. Like, you just feel at home on it. Now guys, this is where our ride together ends, but my ride's not over yet. I'm gonna keep riding for a while longer, but I'll see you guys back at the garage to wrap up this video. So, now you've heard my thoughts on the 2018 Ducati Monster 821, but you don't have to take my word for it, and if you're interested in this bike, I suggest you go test ride. In fact, if you'd like to test ride this exact model, it is available for demo rides up at Ducati Winchester, which, once again, I've linked their information below. Go ride it for yourself, see what you think. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button, because if you like motorcycles, this is the place to be. If you've got any additional questions about this bike, something I didn't cover, or something you maybe like a little bit more information on, let me know in the comments section below. And as always, I'll talk to you again soon.